Let's talk about Pascal's wager. This is something I had never heard of until a few weeks ago, and someone had mentioned it in the comments, and they basically had asked me, they're saying, Pascal's wager, really? That's what you're saying that you believe? Because I didn't know that, but apparently that is my viewpoint. I am a Christian who's willing to admit that in the end, I could be wrong. Because in the same way, let's say an atheist cannot prove that there is no God, I can't prove to an atheist that there definitely is. Everything that I would use as reasons why there is a God ultimately is not going to translate as, well, that's a definite reason that God exists. I recognize that. So in the end, I have to recognize that ultimately I could be wrong about what I believe as a Christian. And something I had said in another video was this. Ultimately, in the end, for me personally, what's the worst that could happen if I'm wrong? And that was the question I asked. And I guess I've thought that way since high school. I remember when I was a boy, probably younger than my son is now. Let's say I was 6 or 7. And my dad would read the children's Bible to me. And I learned all these stories in the Bible. And I remember asking him, I said, how do we know that we're right? What if we're not right? You know, and I've carried that question with me my whole life, and it hasn't bothered me, but I'm aware of that. But for me, I sorted out at some point, probably in high school, that ultimately, even if I am wrong, what's the worst that could happen to me? As a Christian, what I do believe, one of the things I believe, is basically the meaning of life is to love your neighbor as yourself, because loving other people is loving God. So, believing that, treating people with kindness, helping people who have less than me, if I live a life that way, thinking forgiveness is a choice, right? People not holding on to bitterness, but saying, I have to be willing to forgive anyone for anything at any point because worse things have happened to me and people have forgiven that person. In the same way that I cannot be so vain to believe that I'm someone so special that, well, they can't say that to me. They can't talk to me that way. That's offensive. That's rude. No, putting my pride aside. You know what? I'm not that awesome. And I know that. So yeah, people are going to say stuff, but ultimately, I control my own emotions. I decide whether someone offends me or insults me. And a Christian of all people, they should be the last that could be offended. And that's one of the goals that I try to live by. So living my life that way, what's the worst that could happen? How is that a bad thing? How am I hurting anyone by living my life that way? Who am I ultimately systematically mistreating if ultimately, and even on a worldwide level, I don't think that Americans are better people than people somewhere else in the world. We're all human beings and we all deserve to be treated with love and respect. That's how I think. So what is my belief hurting other people by believing that and living my life the best I can to that ability? And then the other side of that question is, okay, so if I'm wrong about Christianity, when I die, what's the worst that could happen to me? Okay, because Christians believe that if you recognize that you were born with a sinful nature and that no one is a good person, only Christ was born good and born perfect and without a sin nature, and that by believing in him we can be saved and live in eternal paradise. But if you instead deny that, then what happens? Well, then you are not saved, and then you've got destruction as your fate after you die. What exactly is hell? What exactly does hell entail? I don't know. What exactly does heaven entail? I don't really exactly know that either. But I'm a man of faith, right? But for me, personally, if I'm wrong, what's the worst that happens to me? Okay? Maybe it's like the Matrix. When we die, ultimately, it's just like a computer program and then, oh, okay, all this was for nothing. Okay, I get it. Or maybe you just cease to exist and everything turns black, but then you don't have any more consciousness left, so you're not even aware that it's all black. You just don't exist anymore. Or maybe a different religion was right, but even then, like, okay, in the Jewish religion, what's the worst that can happen to you when you die? In Islam, what's the worst that could happen to someone who's not actually of the faith but lives by the principles that I've shared just a few minutes ago in this video? By any other religion, what's the worst that could really happen to me? I think in most religions, a guy like me, based on how I believe and live my life, which is to love other people as myself and to make myself not number one, but instead to live the best I can in humility and to think I'm not awesome and it's okay if they say something that's rude to me or cut me off in traffic. I don't wish harm upon them. For my enemies, if I have any, I want blessings to happen to them because I want to see redemption. You know, I'm not asking a question, why do bad things happen to good people? I'm not a good person. And maybe good things should happen to bad people. Maybe that's their path to redemption, that they can become better. But that's not for me to determine who's good and who's bad. Because in my mind, none of us are good people. Only through Christ can we be saved and can we know what righteousness is. But if I'm wrong, what's the worst that happens to me versus someone who doesn't believe in Christ and is wrong? There's a lot more for them to lose than for me to lose. Maybe in theory there's really nothing to lose other than the fact that my version of what life is all about and what heaven is all about, that version of reality wasn't real. Okay, well then let's go with your version. Is it going to be that bad for me compared to if I didn't believe and was wrong? That's what Pascal's wager is. Now granted, I'm not saying that ultimately I'm going with this whole Pascal's wager thing because it's the safest, smartest bet. No. My beliefs in Christianity are 100%. But I'm simply, as an afterthought, saying, in the end, if I'm wrong, seems like I've got less to lose than someone else who believes what I believe is just some weird fairy tale or whatever. It seems like other people would have more to lose than me in this situation. That is my understanding of what Pascal's wager is. And I think it's an interesting topic. And I think the conversation's not over. I think it continues. Where? You guessed it. Comment section. Bingo, right there.